Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Hi, yeah, I'm Nick. I am the founder of Trumpet. I used to be the founder of a company called DesignMyNight, which I exited in 2019. I'm also an angel investor in about 55 startups across the globe and have my own podcast called Pitch Deck, which is about helping founders on their pitch, pre-seed and seed.
Good introduction. You've done that before, I can tell. I didn't know about the podcast. That's really cool. We're actually in the process of about to, we've just finished our deck, so I might have to ask you about it at some point. Look, great to have you on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I know how incredibly busy you are, so thank you for taking the time to jump on. I've got a ton of questions I want to ask you about, but before we kind of get stuck into all of the crazy workings of my brain and trying to fulfill my curiosity, can you just take us back to the beginning, I guess, with DesignMyNight? I'm really curious about that. Oh, well, maybe even before that, actually. What led up to that? Had you done anything entrepreneurial before that? Like, what was Nick up to around that sort of time? Were you just doing a typical 9 to 5? Would you have any interest in entrepreneurialism, or was this always the goal?
Yeah, I think like way back, I don't think entrepreneurialism was on the road for me. However, when I think back, I do remember like at secondary school, I published my own football magazine called Footy Fanatics, and sold
Catchy
that.
name.
Yeah, good name. And sold that at school. So I guess that is entrepreneurialism. My mum, my dad, both have their own businesses. So again, I was sort of just bred with that and sort of understood what it takes. Because obviously I saw my parents do it and they still do to this day. So I guess, yeah, it was there in me. However, I did languages at university, and then went into marketing. So the creative side of my brain works a lot better than the sort of mathematical side of my brain. Went to L'Oreal straight out of uni, a great company to work for. It's a beauty company, but essentially a marketing company. Tons and tons of brands as well to work on. So I had like 4 great years there, rose up pretty quickly. And in my head, would have been happy to stay there, become general manager of a brand, et cetera, and then sort of have a career in marketing like that. However, it was my best mate from uni who always did want to do his own thing. We were on holiday together in New York, and that's when we started coming up with the idea for DesignMyNight. And that then started the curiosity going for me. And, we got excited by that. And then eventually we did go on that journey, and I left sort of the corporate world behind. So yes, I think I've always had it in me, but I haven't been the type of person that was, thought I want to start my own business.
So it wasn't something like you recognized necessarily early on and being there.
I think it must have been subconsciously. And I think the normalization from my parents who never had a 9 to 5. So I guess, you follow what you know in a lot of instances. Yeah, I saw them doing their own thing, basically.
What do they do? What are their businesses?
My dad's in the fashion industry, and my mum's in the beauty industry. So,
okay.
And they've been doing their own thing, since I was a kid. I think just seeing that, and realizing that I didn't have to follow, the 9 to 5 path. I think that allows you to maybe be a bit more creative in you thinking what a career looks like for you.
It's interesting as well. You mentioned about sort of having more of a creative brain over a mathematical one. That's an affliction I also suffer with, which I always thought for the longest time would be really counterproductive to being a founder because of because similar to you, my parents were both quite entrepreneurial. My father more so than my mother, and I always got the impression that being mathematically minded or very technically minded was a really important prerequisite for being a business owner. Basically, you're gonna have to sit down and count money, and you know what I mean. Like there's a way a kid looks at sort of running a business, I guess, and I guess it's turned out to be very much the opposite, especially when it comes to sort of problem solving and marketing, right? Which has played a really important part in my life. Have you found it to be much of the same, or do you still get frustrated that you haven't got the more mathematical side? Has it been something you've had to work on?
Yeah, I've definitely worked on it. Like pure mathematics, just to give you an idea, to get into L'Oreal, it was a grad scheme back in the day, and for some reason they did maths as one of the tests.
Okay.
And they pulled me in at the end we had this long day of different tests. And they said, we'll be honest with you, Nick, we're a bit of a quandary with you, because the marketing test is one of the best we've ever seen. Your maths test was probably the worst we've ever seen. And I just sort of I had to prove myself there and then. And, it was like GCSE, like maths questions, like if the train leaves the station here, blah, blah, blah. And I just said to them, I was like, well, look, this is a marketing role. I'm very good at Excel because I'm not very good at maths. So, if you're looking to hire someone, who's creative, but, I understand numbers, but I just can't calculate them very well, then, I think I'm worth taking a punt on. Unfortunately, they did. And I think you've also got to then look at your deficits with who you co-founder. So like Andrew, who has been my co-founder throughout and still is to this day on new projects, is the opposite. So he's less creative and more statistical, analytical, mathematical. So, I am very aware of my deficits. I work on them, but also having a partner that can fill that hole.
Sort of counterbalances, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why we work so well as a team as well.
Yeah. It's a good way to go about it. So you guys come up with this idea in New York then. So what was the catalyst for it? Had it been brewing for a while, or was it literally like one of those sort of light bulb-ish moments?
It was a bit light bulb. We can't remember the exact moment, but we were.
Was it because alcohol was involved, or just because
it was a very boozy night?
The best ideas usually are forgotten quite quickly.
It was actually in a restaurant called Benny's Burritos in Greenwich Village, and we had frozen margaritas, and we genuinely don't know what they put in them, but we were like falling off the chair, rolling on the floor, laughing. It was that type of night. And actually, for his stag do, he's married an American lady. I took him back to that restaurant for his stag do as well. And I think we can't remember who came up with the idea, but I think we were discussing, like, the hotel concierge that night before we went out asked us questions, what type of vibe do you want? What area do you think? And then there was a website, which I can't remember the name of, which doesn't exist, which was all about drinks offers in New York. I'm born and bred London. I knew the London going out scene very well. And it was that night where we were like, oh, wouldn't this type of website be like super helpful in London? It was only like Time Out, which obviously still exists today. And then there was a website called View London, which was very big back in the day, but just wasn't very good, to be frank. And we were like, oh, wouldn't that be super helpful in London, as well as blending over like the concierge element? So you could find the exact type of place you wanted to go and then see if there was an offer there, especially because we were young, we were like early 20s, and obviously London's very expensive. And that was the catalyst for the idea of sort of an offers website with a concierge element. And yeah, we sort of pinned it that night and said, look, let's do some research when we're back home. Let's look what websites do actually exist. And there was that gap. Interestingly as well, at that time, there was like the Compare the Market websites all launching. So like price comparison sites. So then we sort of took it a next step and we're like, oh, from a marketing point of view, wouldn't be like a price comparison site for going out be quite a cool marketing hook. So that's sort of how we launched it. It obviously evolved massively, but that was the first carnation of it, was the first price comparison site for going out in London.
How old were you guys around this sort of time?
24.
Oh, right, okay. Because this is very much a lad in their 20s idea, isn't it?
Yeah. The irony is, as soon as starting the business, I'd never gone out so little. So I sort of lost all of my 20s because we were so focused on the business. But going out, partying, that's what we were doing. Yeah. and the amount of decks and of the new DesignMyNight I've seen since, I think, yeah, it's a very young person's business because, obviously they say try and solve for what you know.
Yeah.
So obviously you feel that pain point if you are young and going out in London. So it doesn't surprise me that still to this day, there are lots of people that now look at the status quo of going out and think, how can we do it better?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what was next? I mean, like you said, you got back, you presumably worked on the idea, poked around with it, refined it a little bit, and then wanted to get building. So back at that time, I presume that there wasn't half as many sort of tools there were, as there are now to sort of build something in a night, no code tools, this, that, and the other. So what was your first point of call? Like, did you guys know what you needed to do next, or was it pretty much sort of just figuring it out as you were going, or?
Yeah, so it's back in 2009. So very little options. You either had to be a developer or go to an agency. Again, we had a serendipitous moment that we were both at a friend's birthday I remember in a pub in Hammersmith by the river in London. And I was just chatting to this guy who I didn't know, and he owned an agency. And I sort of told him about the idea, and I was like, is this something you could be interested in? And we sort of negotiated there and then. He was like, look, I really like the idea. Look, why don't I do it quite discounted? And then I stay with you as you guys grow. And be your agency. So we sort of struck up the deal in a pub, which made sense.
It fits the theme, doesn't it?
Fits the narrative, yeah. And so he became our digital agency for a very good price, and he started building the website. We were literally drawing out the designs on PowerPoint and stuff. So neither of us are designers. We've both got very good eye, but we're not designers. We didn't have stuff like Figma, any of that stuff. So we were literally drawing out the homepage on PowerPoint, sending it over to his team. And it took us about probably 6 months to create the site while we were still at our jobs. So we were doing it very much on the side. We did the classic. We literally met every weekend. He worked at Accenture. We actually went to his office. So he signed us in every weekend. We used their office in the city. And then we would meet most weeknights. Is
this going to be the first they know about that now? Are you going to get a bill?
Probably, yeah. They can't. I think it's too late for them to claim back any cash. And we also met midweek. I actually remember there's a Starbucks just off Regent Street, which is still there. That's where we used to meet because we were on different ends of town. So we used to meet in the middle, met a few nights a week, looking at the designs, coming up with ideas. And obviously we were very bootstrapped, so we didn't have really much money. So part of that job was also just going around speaking to bar owners. So again, boots on the ground. We didn't have an iPad with the idea on. We literally had a piece of paper with what we were trying to do. And we would go into pubs and bars, ask to speak to the manager and say, look, this is what we're building. What do you think? What would you like Time Out to do? What would you like View London to do that it doesn't? So we were getting lots of ideas. And that also built up our sales funnel.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
So we were just speaking to hundreds and hundreds of bar and pub owners on weekends and nights while the site was being built. We also scraped, which again you could do with AI very quickly now, but scraped Time Out originally in View London just to get the base data, bar name, address, telephone number, just so we had a website to launch with. And that took 6 months, and then just very quietly put it live. And saw where it went from there, basically.
I mean, that's not that long, really. I mean, 6 months is pretty speedy. All things considered.
Yeah, all things considered. I think now, I think you could move a lot quicker. A comparison.
But given the time and stuff like that, that's
I'd say now for a marketplace website, there's templates and actually it's just getting the data and say probably use AI or something now to scrape the data. So I think because it was from literally scratch with no designs, we did it quite quickly. but as I said, like there was a lot of work that went into that, every night, every weekend as well.
Yeah, very impressive. And where did the, I would say, foresight or motivation or whatever come from to go around just knocking on the doors and doing, essentially all of that sort of groundwork with the bars? I mean, is that something that was just common sense to you? Because of now there's a lot of conversation about getting to know your customers, getting feedback, don't build in isolation, and it's sort of this big thing that's talked about again and again and again. And I know you went through the same process with Trumpet as well, which we'll get to, but was that instinctive, or did you has that something that you guys sort of had read, or you know what I mean, like, because if it's kind of got those that sort of YC kind of vibe to it, right? It's like, go and know your customer.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was like no founder content back then, so there wasn't much to read or podcasts to listen to. So it's very much instinct. Look, as a marketeer, like, you're always taught to understand your customer as well.
Yeah.
So that was sort of bred in me at L'Oreal. I worked for a luxury brand there, one of their luxury brands. So that was huge in the L'Oreal culture, like really understand the person, or in the brand I was working for, the woman that you were selling to, especially when it's luxury. That's even sort of a different level of understanding. So I guess that was always just bred in me from my time at L'Oreal, but just also common sense that this was an industry we didn't know anything about apart from being a customer. And we had to understand both sides of the marketplace, and we didn't know anything about how bars and pubs operate. So how do you understand that? You go and speak to them. Like, there was no like ChatGPT or Perplexity to, reason with on what concerns pub and bar owners have. So yeah, it was a bit of both, but I would say mainly common sense.
Yeah. So what was the initial business model then? Like, so how, because you're saying you were also building pipeline by speaking to them. So what was it that they were getting, and what was it you were getting from them, or were you going to get that was going to start generating that initial revenue?
Yeah, the funny thing around business model was when we actually exited, which I'm sure we'll get to, like we only had sort of 6-7 angel investors that put in $500,000 on our whole journey. And when we exited, they took us out for a nice dinner, and they had a private room, and they put up on the screen the business plan that we gave to them, that they originally invested in, which was incredibly embarrassing. And it was the standard marketplace model, to be honest. So when we launched, it was get traffic and then sell sort of like ad space to bars and pubs. If you want to go up the listing, if you want a premium feature, all of that stuff. And then we had banner ads. So, trying to sell to people that wanted to advertise to our audience. So yeah, classic old school, like web 2.0. It was, advertising revenue and sort of like featured listings revenue. And we ran it like that for actually a couple of years. And then luckily had the smarts to pivot along the way into different models, and then into software, which ultimately allowed us to exit.
Right. And you mentioned the angels there. Then, so at what stage did you start thinking about raising investment? Was that fairly soon after launch, or?
No. So right. Again, because there was this lack of content, like we had no idea about raising money, angel investing. It just wasn't in our vocabulary.
All completely alien to you, yeah.
Yeah, just didn't even know it existed, to be honest.
Oh, really? Okay.
And if we did, it was in San Fran. So again, another serendipitous moment was we were at a friend's dinner party, and the friend's dad started chatting to Andrew in the kitchen and asking him, what he does and stuff. And he mentioned DesignMyNight. And the dad was the head of entrepreneurship at London Business School.
Right.
He was like, this is very interesting. Like, do you guys have a mentor or anything? And we were like, no. And he was like, look, really like you guys. This sounds very interesting. I'm happy to mentor you, like come in once a quarter to my office, let's chat. So we did that, obviously, took him up on that. Lovely, lovely guy. And probably like a year into it after that, so that's probably a year and a half into the project, he said to us, I think you guys should raise some money. And what do you know? He was one that wanted to invest. And he said, look, I normally invest in these types of things with like a group of like 15. So I'll introduce you to all of them, but then it's up to you to go and pitch them one by one. So yeah, we went down that path. We met all of them individually. And as I said, there was about 6 or 7 that were like, yes. We did a deal that was 250K across all of them. And then almost a guarantee that in another year, we'd get another 250K. The only thing that was up for debate in that contract was the valuation. So he gave us certain milestones to hit. And if we would have hit those, we would get the higher valuation. If we didn't, we'd get the lower valuation. But they all committed to giving us 250 in one tranche and then 250 in the next tranche. So yeah, again, another huge slice of luck. But I say that to founders now, like, especially with social, and again, social media wasn't as big back then, is just put yourself out there. Put yourself out there, put the idea out there. All this doing it in stealth rubbish, like just put yourself out there,
100%.
Speak to people about your idea, because you don't know who you're speaking to. And, to have met him, you would never have known, if you're being judgmental, that he was the head of entrepreneurship at London Business School. And then he obviously became our lead investor and our chairman and took us all the way through to exit. So from that one meeting in that kitchen was like very pivotal to us.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, it's literally a clip from this week's show that's kind of somehow doing the rounds on TikTok from this show, and it's me and my guest talking about this exact thing of just tell anyone who'll listen about your idea. Just tell okay, there are a few exceptions. I get, stealth. I don't know. Either you're in stealth because you're in employment where you can't technically be doing something on the side, or there's, I don't know, some serious IP that really needs to be protected, or you're in the process of getting patented, whatever. But for the most part, just go out and tell bloody everyone, because you never know. I mean, that's very much a common theme with what you're telling me about these serendipitous moments, is that, A, you're being social. So you're actually being in the real world. You're going out and you're meeting people in these social environments. And B, like you say, you're just telling people about what it is your idea is, or what you want to do, or whatever it might be, right? Because there's something infectious about that excitement as well.
Well, it's the excitement. You need to be buzzed. I think it's a very British attitude, at least, that, it's like if someone asks you, it's almost like, oh, it's tough. Where if you speak to an American, they're like, oh my God, I'm so pumped. I'm focusing on this project. It's going to be the next big thing. Brits, we're just like, oh God.
I feel like there's a slight embarrassment about it as well, because it feels silly. So I've got this silly little idea I'm working on. It's like, whereas at a cocktail party, you're expected to talk about the amazing career that you've got and how stable it is. It's like, not that you're working on a little project. It's, you know what I mean? Like there's something odd about that.
And it's also understanding that a lot of people you speak to won't get it. Yeah. And that's fine. All of the best companies, you look at the Airbnb story and all of those, they were turned down so many times. People were like, you're an idiot. Like no one's going to rent a sofa or whatever it was.
Yeah.
There is that embarrassment of people just being like, what are you doing? It's having that bit of confidence, that trust in what you're doing, have a bit of an American attitude to what you're doing, which doesn't come naturally to a lot of Brits. And just, put yourself out there, speak to people, have an infectious attitude, make people want to help you.
That's an incredibly important quality to have as a founder anyway, right? I mean, because that's going to be your job for the most part, whether it's raising money, employing staff, building a team, etc. I mean, that's literally the job title.
And actually, when, a big question I always get now as an investor is, what do you look for in a founder? And actually the ability to sell, I think, is one of the most underrated traits of a founder. And selling, again, in the UK is a bit of a dirty word, but as you just said, you need to be able to sell your business, you need to sell yourself, you need to sell it to your employees to come on the journey, you need to sell it to investors, you need to have a salesperson mentality, and if you don't, you need to go and read up on it and learn about it and learn the art of the sell, because it's a skill. And Trumpet is now a sales tool, so I'm very immersed in the world of sales, and I've learned a lot about sales. And what makes a good salesperson is genuinely an incredible skill. It's not just having the gift of the gab.
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychology to selling as well. So, if you're a more introverted person and maybe an engineer or something, either go and find that co-founder that is the opposite of you, or go and read up and learn about the art of selling.
Yeah, put yourself out there. Yeah, regular listeners of this show will know that I harp on about this a lot, about founders being really focused on this as being I think a key skill for success. But one aspect of it, I think, that isn't talked about enough as well in this conversation, and even when I talk about it too, is that, well, two aspects of it. The first is that I think sales is massively misunderstood. Like you said, it's a bit of a dirty word in the UK, especially, when really all it really is the art of communication. That's all it is. It's not. A lot of people perceive it as like the art of manipulation, or so dodgy tactics. Convincing people to do something they don't want to do. Couldn't be further from the truth. That's the gift of the gab side of it, which isn't representative, I think, of the majority of the way that it's usually implemented. And then the other side of it, like I say, is being much more about the art of communication. Both physical, body communication. Active listening, everything, being well articulated and all of that. But the other part of it, which I think is really important, is, we were rattling off the reasons why it's all really useful, who you're going to sell to along that journey. I think the number one most important reason to why it's the number one person who you need to be selling to consistently every single day is yourself, because it's a very difficult journey. As you know, being an entrepreneur, and you have these peaks and troughs of confidence that come with that. It's a lot of self-doubt. And if you're not convincing anyone else, you're certainly not convincing yourself. And you're far less likely to succeed if you don't have conviction in your own idea and your journey, right?
Yeah, I think internal conviction is huge. And I've actually often said, I never thought DesignMyNight was going to fail.
Right.
I always knew it was going to exit, even through the tough times. I don't know what it was. And I feel the same with Trumpet now as well. Like, there's just something there that I'm like, okay, there is a market and we've got the products. And now it's down to me and my team. So, the most difficult thing when starting a business is knowing if there is going to be someone that wants to buy your product. When you've proven that people want to buy your product, it's down to you to execute it. Yeah. So I knew when we got, I think especially when we pivoted to software at DesignMyNight, that there was a market for what we were selling. So it was down to me to make it work or not.
Rev Ops leaders, let's be real. You can't optimize what you can't measure. You've got the dashboards, the pipeline data, the forecasts, but what about your sales team's actual skills? That's where Peer, today's sponsor and my startup shamelessly, comes in. Peer runs remote, expert-led sales skills audits. Think of it like a MOT for your revenue team. Instead of guessing who needs coaching or relying on lagging performance data, Peer proactively identifies strengths, skill gaps, and hidden risks before they impact revenue. The best RevOps teams run these audits regularly, creating a structured AI-ready data set that powers smarter hiring, sharper enablement, and faster revenue growth. The best part? You can get started with a free discovery audit plus 20% off your first full audit today. Just click the link in the show notes or use the QR code on screen, and you can start making data-driven sales decisions today. Now, back to the episode.
I think that's quite a male trait. I speak to a lot of my female friends about this, and they say, yeah, I think, unfortunately, that this self-belief, this confidence seems to be more of a male trait.
That's interesting.
Which is really disappointing.
Is it because maybe the line between that level of confidence and arrogance is quite thin?
Yes. And I think that is super important. Like, one of the big swords I will die on is the needing to take your ego out of everything you do. And the problem we have is you have people like Elon Musk and all of those that, have the biggest egos in the planet and have gone on to build generational products, but they are the minority, they are the very, 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 very minority of the people that are building that type of company. I think as a founder fishing in the normal pool where you want to sell for, let's say, I don't know, like 20 to a couple of 100 million as an exit, I think ego is one of the biggest things that sends a founder down the wrong path. And yes, arrogance plays into ego as well. And so it is definitely that fine line of internal confidence, but not arrogance, not ego. And the other side of it, and I see a lot of this, is unfortunately having the what's the word, the nous to actually know when you're also flogging a dead horse. Yeah. So like actually you've got to know when it's just not working. So it's sort of contradicting what I'm saying.
No, but this is the big contradiction with what we do, and it comes up. This subject comes up a lot in this show about how just seemingly impossible it is to strike that balance, because you need to be doing essentially two opposite things simultaneously. So it doesn't feel natural. and it's difficult to articulate.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole product market fit story. So I think when you find product market fit, for me, that's when it's down to you to execute.
Yeah.
Until you found product market fit, you're not there yet, and you, I guess, need to just be very self-aware of the signals you're getting from the industry and how long you're going to give this a go. Before you just decide, okay, actually, this idea isn't the one.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about like the Elon Musk of the world too, because I think that it's very dangerous for us or any founder to try and sort of compare ourselves to the founders that we see in the headlines and on Twitter and stuff, because they also have another game that they're playing that most founders don't, which is the being publicly famous game, the celebrity game. And that does require, I think, a certain level of ego on display in order to succeed. So, it may even be very performative, actually, when you think about it. Maybe day to day in being a founder, it doesn't play a part that much, if at all. But in the public sort of eye, it does, because it wins in that sphere. So it's an interesting game. And I don't think very many founders have to ever get to that point.
Especially B2C. So if you're selling to, if you think Musk is Tesla, Jobs, Apple, Microsoft.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, all of these big person, in the UK, Alan Sugar back in the day, Richard Branson, all very consumer brands selling to people. And
they are a brand themselves.
So, that's part of it. In the B2B SaaS world, that's kind of changing. But in the B2B SaaS world, I'm just a big believer as a person. I'm a very low key person, to be honest. So I'm one of those founders that believes in getting your head down and doing the work. And that's what I want to see in founders I invest in too. And it's having confidence, but also just getting your head down and working.
It's interesting because actually, now you mention it, I can't think of any. Well, maybe the CEO of NVIDIA, but like I can't think of an enormous amount of sort of public founders, entrepreneurs, CEOs that are more B2B. Okay, Jeff Bezos maybe, but like, well, no, because even then,
Amazon.
Yeah. What am I talking about? So it is mostly B2C, isn't it? Yeah. And
I mean, Bezos. Out of all of actually, I did love Steve Jobs, but Bezos, whether I like him as a person or not, it might be a bit different. But that pivot from them, from Amazon, the front store, to AWS, the server company, is one of the most genius pivots of our generation. And, that makes up the majority of their revenue now. So, I think Amazon are an incredibly smart company to look at. I've read all the books about Amazon and all of their pivots. For me, that they're one of the best stories. But actually Bezos wasn't very public eye. Again, it's become this thing over maybe the last decade that they feel like they have to become that. Now Zuckerberg's gone on, this tech bro transformation from being like this nerd to this guy that's like wakeboarding with jewelry on and stuff. So, whether that's their PR spin,
you got to play the game, especially when you're that big and you've got influence, right? And then you're being asked to come and speak to Congress and stuff like that. You've got an image, and I think that, Mark is a really good example of, him being caught like a deer in the headlights in those first couple of instances when being asked to come and speak to Congress or whatever it was. And then, I'm sure a lot of people around him were like, dude, you need to do something about your brand, and then it's like, oh, okay. And then that's, so I think I'm a firm believer that, I don't know, maybe naively so, in the good of most people. And I guarantee, I'm pretty convinced that the majority of these people, the Musks and the Zuckerbergs and all of them, just like the rest of us founders, like they really wanted to, they really believed in what they wanted to build, and they did it, and they worked hard to achieve it. and they're now into a level that we haven't experienced yet, and so we don't know how we would respond in that situation, probably very similarly.
I mean,
What I mean?
I wouldn't do Nazi salutes, but
well, no, maybe not that bit, but apart from that bit,
he's taking it to a different level. But
yeah.
Zuckerberg, Bezos, all of those, like they're a level of celebrity now.
Right.
That personally is not something I would want.
Wait till this episode comes out.
It is very interesting seeing that shift, but
because that's an entirely new thing to contend with, as a founder.
And that's not what I look up to. Like, the reason I love like Richard Branson and Jobs and people like that at the time is I'm more interested in like the marketing side, the strategic side, the pivots they did. That I find inspiration from. But the reality is that most founders, most of you are going to fail. And the second is to get life-changing money, if that is one of your goals, and let's be honest, for most people it is, even if they don't want to admit it, you don't need to build a unicorn. As I said, if you retain a lot of your equity, you can still have an exit for 20, 30, 40 million, which is very achievable for a lot of people, I would argue. And completely change your life and your friends and family's life, but you won't be in tech crunch. But that's fine. If you put your ego at the door, you don't need to be a public figure.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So let's take a quick step back then to where we were. So DesignMyNight, you secured those investors. How did that, really briefly as well, how did those conversations go? You said, out of the 15 or so that you were introduced to, 7 decided to invest. But I mean, like you said, even now there's a lot of people with these sort of ideas. You're a couple of young guys talking about sort of nightlife and all this sort of thing. And I'm assuming that those that you're pitching to aren't all necessarily within the same sort of age bracket. Like, were they looking at this like, did it take some convincing because of, there's maybe separation from the understanding of the problem that you're trying to fix and sort of a world that, maybe they weren't too familiar with?
Yeah, they definitely weren't familiar with it. I think what they actually said at our exit dinner was, we just really liked you two. We could see you like had the determination, the smarts. You were two, smart guys, complementary skills. And they could see that there was that it's such a big market, hospitality, which is why a lot of people try and go after it. And they said we could see that, the fact you'd gone around and spoken to all of these people was that you would find something in hospitality that you could impact. And it wasn't necessarily going to be an advertising model, but they had the smarts to realize that the industry was quite old school. And those are the best industries to go after that aren't very tech enabled, have old school systems running them. Times were changing. You were going after the millennial back then. Obviously everyone's going after Gen Z now, but you wanted to go after the millennial. Mobile phones were becoming a bigger thing. So they had the smarts to realize that the industry would have to change. And I think they just bet on us. But they said, because we really thought that you understood the industry, you'd spent the time to understand what they were going through, we were just confident that you guys were going to land on something. And that was the bet they made on us.
I mean, that's a pretty deep compliment, if there ever is one, right? I was in that industry for, really, I call it my first career for a number of years, as most kids or young adults do, sort of worked in kitchens and then waitering and then bar work and bar management. And then I used to run nightclubs and music venues and all that. So heavily entrenched in that world for a very, very long time. And that was my first business actually I created, was a consultancy business within that space. So, going to bars and restaurants and nightclubs that are in distress and helping streamline them and make them more profitable. And that was really where I caught the entrepreneurial bug, I guess. But there was something I observed exactly what you're saying there, which is this sort of this legacy attitude, I guess, and to within that space. And I remember when MySpace was a thing, and that was the first. We were using that immediately to start trying to get an edge. Whether it was from a marketing perspective or to reach out to bands, because I was working at a live music venue at the time, and that massively sped things up and increased our brand awareness and all sorts of stuff. But it's a struggle, it was a struggle to convince, let's say, the bar owners and stuff like that at the time. Like, yeah, you need to start doing stuff digitally now. They just couldn't get it. It's like, well, we're going to print some posters and go out and hand some flyers out in the street. I'm like, why? It's not going to work, So yeah,
that's the paradox of going after, I guess, a legacy industry is there's a lot you can help and change, but you also have to be ready for the grunt work to convince people. You have to work super hard to get early adopters and use them as leverage to convince the rest of the industry that this is the way it should go.
That's where that being an excellent communicator and having such conviction and belief in your idea comes in, because you're just not going to get any headway otherwise.
No, exactly. You're come along on this journey. It's going to be good for you. And yeah, there were specifically some like bar group owners that really took a punt on us throughout our whole journey, who I'll forever be thankful for. But yeah, they were excited by our excitement.
Yeah. You also got to make it somewhat of a no-brainer, right? So it's like, even if it doesn't work, what have you got to lose? Like, it's just, just a bit of time. That's all that you're investing in us, and maybe a bit of money. But like, ultimately, if it doesn't work, so what? But I think I was quite fortunate as well, because of something that's definitely carried through even until now, which is in doing that consultancy work. A lot of it was kind of, I was, used to love watching Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. It was a lot like that, less shouting and swearing, but, this idea of going into a business and usually having quite a lot of resistance from some individuals within the business, and you have to try and win them round. I've started watching Ted Lasso on Apple TV recently. Have you started watching that comedy show?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. It's brilliant. And it was funny. It reminded me a lot of those early days where it's like, you have to go in with just such a positive attitude and just be the center of all positivity, because you've got a bunch of people who just really don't want you to be there. They're like, who is this guy? Especially at that time, because I've been like, in my early 20s, and I'm going into these places with people who've been working there for years. They're older than me. Who is this guy? And he's telling us what to do. Like, so you really need to, have all of those, I would say, far more American positivity traits to try and win people over, sometimes to their own disgust, and then you succeed, But all right. So good. Where were we? So let's go to the exit. So how did that come about? Unless there was something in between that you think is important to point out.
Well, I guess the main pivot in the business, which led us to the exit, was discovering software. Right. So we went from being a media business, which was growing very quickly, but had the shelf life, in my opinion, to a software business where we built reservation software, but for the casual industry. So bars, pubs, casual dining, where OpenTable and BookerTable, etc., were focusing on more, proper restaurants. That was our niche. So that was a huge pivot for us to move into software. Obviously, we had to change the structure of the team. We had to start learning new skills on, how you build a team that builds software selling. So that was a huge pivot for us, but one that if we didn't make, probably we wouldn't have lasted. The software really took off. We built it specifically at the start for like the bar industry, and they saw that, and they were trying to use like OpenTable, but at that time, even with OpenTable, you couldn't change the drop down from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So there were bar websites that had their booking widget, and then on the left it said, "Oh, don't worry, if you book dinner, is actually a drinks table." Right.
Yeah, lots of workarounds and stuff like that. Yeah.
So we came in again. We worked with the industry. We built this software. It took us a year, and then when we launched it, bar operators were just like, "Oh, yes." Finally. So we managed to grow that very quickly. Pretty much every cocktail bar in the UK used us. And then we went into pubs, which is great in the UK. So tons of pubs, big pub groups, big contracts.
I would assume this would have been around the time of the smoking ban as well, right? Or not long after.
That? Yeah.
So that would have been ideal for the pub timing too, because a lot of pubs then started introducing food and taking that more seriously.
And like private areas as well. So pub, if you think, is a restaurant, a bar, and they've normally got a private space for parties as well. So it takes actually a lot of management, which they were doing all over the place. So
if you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
We managed to grow that very quickly. And again, a great serendipitous moment. We met the Fuller's team, which in the UK is a big pub group, and they were halfway through building their own software. And it was way over budget, it was way over time. And then they saw where we already were, and they were like, let's scrap this product and work with you guys to make yours even better. So that was a big win for us. And then we went into casual dining. I think one big thing I say to founders is try and find your marquee signing as a signal to the rest of the industry. So for us in casual dining, that was Oaxaca, which again in the UK is a much loved sort of Mexican chain. We, gave them a very cheap price. And actually Oaxaca at the time were a no bookings restaurant. It was come up queue. And they were very popular at that time. So there were lots of queues. And we managed to convince them that that's just not the efficient way to run a business. Like, you're missing out on all these groups that if there's 8 of us, we're not going to stand in a queue. Like, we want to book. So, we gave them a very good price and all of that. But getting Oaxaca on board was big for us. And we then leveraged them from a PR point of view with the industry, that people were like, well, if Oaxaca are using them and they were actually never even did bookings, then this must be the software to use. And then we innovated. You've got to innovate. So like now you're used to probably, unfortunately, putting your credit card down when making a booking at a restaurant. We were the first software to implement that. And all the others copied us. We were the first booking system to allow to do pre-orders online. And so we did a lot of tech advancements, which the rest of the industry, even these huge $100 million companies then copied us. So we were really moving the envelope. We really dominated the casual side of the industry in the UK, became a big threat to the likes of OpenTable and BookerTable, won a lot of business off them as well. And the exit side of things was very strategic. So a lot of founders don't do this, but Andrew and I were very honest with each other from the start on what we wanted out of DesignMyNight. We knew we didn't want to run this business forever. We probably knew it had a shelf life. I think it's very interesting, unless you're very, very well funded, being the young upstart and causing disruption becomes a lot harder once you're the well-known one that's making all the tech advancements. So then they all started ganging up on us.
You're the one that needs to be knocked off the top, right?
So they were ganging up on us. They were copying our tech. So I think Andrew and I got to a point where, and we'd said this from the start, what do we want from DesignMyNight? And to be frank, as well as just running our own business and giving that a shot, was to be financially free. That was what we wanted from this. We knew we were going to give it about 7 to 10 years of our life. And we went away and looked what financially free meant for each of us, came back together. Fortunately, we were very aligned on the figure that was. And we actually just worked back. So we were like, okay, if we need to sell DMN for this to get that figure in our back pocket at least. So we need to probably be at this revenue and or this EBITDA to be able to sell for that. So let's plot over the next few years how we get to that revenue and that EBIT. And that was a graph that we plotted monthly. And if we started to deviate across the business from that chart, we would come together and think, okay, what do we need to change? What's not working to stay on course for that chart? And then probably about a year out from us thinking of forecasting we were going to hit that figure, we spoke to a broker. We said, this is the situation. This is where we think we're going to be in a year. Do you think we can sell it for Y? He was like, yes. So we engaged that broker, and then it took about 8 months from engaging that broker to do the whole exit process, to then exit, and we sold for more than the figure we wanted in the end.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's not a story or version of that story I've heard before, where it was that sort of strategic and calculated, I guess, or at least not anyone that's for whatever reason has revealed to me. That's really interesting. So what you mentioned though, that you both agreed that there wasn't a business you wanted to run for that long. What were the reasons for that, aside from the one you gave, which was like, because you were becoming you're inevitably going to become the target and needs to be knocked down from the sort of top. Like, were there other reasons too? Was it just the type of business that it was, or was it just the amount of energy? Maybe your energy was running low. Were there other reasons?
Yeah, I think all of that. So hospitality is a funny one. In the one hand, it's a wonderful industry. It's very close knit, and if you do good stuff, the word spreads. And we made some really good friends within the industry as well. But it's also a really tough industry. Like, you're dealing with, a lot of the time, people that own these £1 million plus assets but aren't business people. And it gets tiring trying to convince them your way.
Tell me about it.
So I think we looked at hospitality, but yeah, our energy. So, it was our early 20s to eventually, after our earnout, our early 30s. And I think we were just, well, I know we were just exhausted. I think we'd run out of steam to then take it to the next level. And for us, the next level probably would have been going to America, raising cash. And I think we just said to each other, we just haven't got it in us with this business. The lure of being financially free was too alluring. It's something I speak to a lot with investors at the moment. Is, as an investor, if you're looking for that outsized return, so say a VC, how can you know that a founder is going to keep saying no along the journey to huge sums of money to take it to that outsized return? And it's a very difficult trait to try and put your finger on as an investor. And I think for us, we were down to the bare bones financially. We never paid ourselves a big salary along the whole journey. Andrew, at that time, by exit, had 2 kids. So the lure of that money that would make us financially free and just a breath. We're about 100 people as well in the business. It was pre-COVID, so we were all in the office every day. It just took its toll on us. So I think all of that combined, we were like, actually, I think this is the right time for us to go.
And you mentioned that as well. I was going to ask, which was, with Andrew, like having 2 kids and so on, these are informative years for most people, like that specific sort of age time. There must have been a lot going on in your personal lives as well that you kind of maybe feel like you're missing out on, or, typically you'd been spending a lot, more time in. So I can kind of understand why, it felt like the right time.
Yeah, I think, you sort of did miss out on our 20s. Not like woe is us, but while our friends, we wouldn't be going out as much. A, couldn't afford to, but B, I just feared being hungover and then the next day not being able to run the business clearly. So yeah, it was we did sort of miss out on most of our 20s. And it was a very head down 24/7, sort of very unfashionable thing to talk about nowadays, but it was 24/7, 7 days a week. We did go on holidays, but you've got your phone in your hand the whole time. Yeah, for 7-8 years, we just didn't switch off at all. I think we just reached a natural conclusion that we were just exhausted with it.
Time to get paid eventually, right?
Exactly.
And what you said there, it's not fashionable to talk about. I don't get that. I mean, in the similar way that we were just saying about how sort of talking openly about, the project you're working on, the business idea you've got is, and that sort of passion, all that is inherently kind of almost an anti-British sort of personality trait. Yes, so too is, it seems, talking about willing to work hard. I don't know when that changed, like it seems, or if it was ever, I don't know if it's always been like that. I don't know, because I think I maybe was in a bit of a bubble growing up with my family, sort of being entrepreneurial and so on. But
I guess it's the whole hustle culture thing, isn't it? And
right.
I think it's twofold. I think what's happened, is this not working for a corporate has sort of overlapped into the entrepreneurial world.
Right.
And I totally get, I really admire the younger generation now that are like, okay, my job's my job. Like, I'm going to give it a go and I'm going to work hard. But no, I'm not going to work till 7 at night and I'm not going to work on my holidays. Like, great, because you know what? Life is more than that. So if you get your job done and you're diligent, I totally applaud that. And we're the same at Trumpet now. Obviously, we've got like a younger team and I don't expect any of them to reply to me on a weekend or anything like that. But I think what's happened is that mentality has seeped over into being a founder as well. And it's like, well, yeah, I shouldn't have to work that hard either if I want to be a founder. But it doesn't work because obviously you're working for yourself. And if you want those outsized returns personally, well, then you have to put the graft in. If you just want a salary, then yeah, go and do your 9 to 5. And I applaud you that you don't have to, do overtime and weekends and stuff. But yeah, I think that's sort of eked into the founder world that is very unsexy to talk about, but
it's very naive, because I mean, as you know, for the majority of that journey, if not sometimes all of it, you're doing the jobs of multiple people. And so to think that you can do it by doing the bare minimum is just absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, it's just not going to work.
I even take some issue, though, with this attitude that people have about sort of their corporate jobs too, to an extent, which is, look, I get it. It's not your business. No one's ever going to work as hard or should work as hard on your business than you. You can't expect your employees to take it and as seriously or have as much passion as you. I think that's an important thing to understand. And yes, we shouldn't expect, team members, employees, whatever, to work evenings, weekends, and all that. But at the same time, and this is where contradiction again comes up, where, I think two things can be true, even though they appear to be diametrically opposed. It's a really competitive world, right? And if you do want that promotion, you do want to be taken more seriously, get a seat at the table or whatever, like, you have to stand out because someone else is going to do that. Someone else is going to. And so there is a bit of a dilemma there, which is like, you've got to show up, and if you do want to, achieve those certain things or get that extra insight, maybe you have ambitions of being a founder yourself and you want to learn and get closer to the founder of the business you work for, or whatever it might be, understand how the boardroom works, or understand managerial skills. You're gonna have to do that, and that might mean pulling all-nighters. It might mean working weekends. And this is, from someone who's worked in sales for a very long time, I can tell you that in the sales world, especially, we don't care about working evenings and weekends. Like, in fact, if anything, you have to. If you want to hit those numbers, you want to hit your targets and sometimes keep your job, that's what you have to do. So it's a difficult one for me.
Yeah, I've sort of shifted slightly. I think I used to be in your camp in what you're saying. I think sales is different. And I think sales is different because you're almost like a founder of your own business in sales.
Yeah.
And, we offer uncapped commission at Trumpet. So it's like, you can go and make as much money as you want. And, that might mean, yes, working late because you're speaking to a customer in America. I'm never going to force you to do that. But if you want to hit target, if you want to exceed target, the opportunities are endless. Yep. It's different when you're not commissioned or bonus and you know what your salary is going to be. I think what I would say is it's less about necessarily showing up and pulling all-nighters and all of that, and more just being really fucking good at your job. Right. And I think what I appreciate now over graft is excellence. So if you're not grafting and you're not excellent, that's a problem. If you're really grafting, but your output is so-so, that's also a problem. I would rather you show up to work fresh every day and your output is excellent and your head is down and you're not spending half your day chatting to the team on Slack. And then by all means, shut your laptop at 5 if your output has been excellent. So I think that's what I really look for now is excellence. And as a founder, I want people that I can confidently hand work over to. I know you are excellent at your job and your output is going to be excellent. So go do that. Yeah. And I would rather have that person than the person that works evenings and weekends but is average.
Look, just for clarity, I agree with you, and this is where I find it's conflicting, because if I agree, I want my team to be refreshed and after a weekend spend time with their family and all of that, because I agree, focus is important and having that balance is important. But I guess there are, whether it's just in sales or not, I don't think it is just in sales. I think there are other industries or groups too, where, if you do want, like a good example, I had someone on the show recently who came from the world of investment banking, and then went on to become an angel investor and et cetera, a few other things. And he was talking about his journey, throughout, going to college, university, and then, going into the world of finance and all that. And he was saying, okay, maybe there's a bit more of this sort of sales bro kind of world to an extent, but at the end of the day, if you're not willing to put in those extra hours, someone else is going to. And there are lots of other industries like that. Solicitors is a good example. There are medical professionals I've had on the show that another thing. There's a lot of industries like that, and I just worry that maybe that way of thinking kind of bleeds over into some of these industries, which are so highly competitive that you can't just even your best sometimes isn't good enough, is my point. Do you know what I mean? And,
I
and
guess
that worries me a little bit because
if you've got 10 people that are all excellent,
right,
are you as a founder or boss going to pick the one that works the hardest and is excellent? Maybe. So yeah. And yes, as you're saying, like law, medicine, you've almost got no choice. Some of my friends are lawyers, and I see the hours they put in, and it's
crazy. Yeah.
But again, it's slightly different because the money that you are going to make.
Right. Yeah, that's true. There's another incentive. If you're on a fixed salary and this is your 9 to 5, then
you're going to get your 10% maybe every year.
Mm-hmm.
You know where you're going to cap out, and if that's where you're going to cap out, but your output is excellent. Don't make. Go and enjoy your life at the same time.
Don't kill yourself over it. Yeah.
I think if you're going to go into law, it's going to be hard, and you can earn hundreds and hundreds, if not millions of pounds, or dollars. So you're going to have to put in that work. So
you're absolutely right. Context matters, right? The situation matters. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, look, we've got to the end of part 1. It's been very fascinating, but we've got a lot more to talk about. So those listening and watching, please stick around, come back in a couple of days, subscribe, all that nonsense that you have to do to get alerted when part 2 comes out. And in part 2, which for us will be in a minute, I want to ask you about what happens next, right? So, we've got right up to the end of the DesignMyNight journey, but of course there's Trumpet and your angel investing. So we're going to dive into that, if that's all right. So, thanks very much. And that's end of part 1.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.